She is unable to join us for the very beginning, but she will join us a bit later. So I'll give her the floor when she joins us. So in the meantime, I suggest that we begin with a panel. We have asked the head of the Ukrainian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly, Nikita Poturayev, to open the floor, to open the discussion with an update on the situation and any considerations from his side on what does he see as the role of the OSCE and the Parliamentary Assembly specifically to try to help, and which are the key areas. So Nikita, good to see you. Good afternoon, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Umberta. Thank you, Ambassador Zanier. Thank you, all my friends and distinguished colleagues. Well, the situation is the same. While we will be speaking, some of our guys and girls will die, will be killed by Russian invaders and occupants. You know, our Minister of Foreign Affairs has prepared fine theses for me, and they all are absolutely right about mass destroyings, mass killings, acts of genocide that we all know already about. But I wanted to tell you another story. I wanted to tell you a story about family of cats. You know, last week near Mykolaiv, near one of villages near Mykolaiv, local people has found place where very rare forest cats lived. They are in Red Book. According to last information, there were only 500 creatures of that type in Ukraine. European forest cats. They are very rare. They don't like to live near people. Probably they know something about us. That's why they don't want to live next to us. You know, common understanding of what is Ukrainian South is that it's prairie, steppe prairie, but no. There are also forests. Some of them are ancient. Some of them are planted by Ukrainians who cared about their land for centuries. And in this small forest, local people, they went there to find some wood. Because of Russian constant shellings, they don't have, you know, gas, they don't have water, they don't have anything in their houses. In their houses that they built, or their parents or their grandparents built by their own hands. So they went to this forest for some wood, to get some fire, to prepare some food. And they found these cats. Their mother, cat mother, was killed by Russian rocket. But 3 tiny cats were still alive. And our people took these cats and passed them to Mykolaiv so that people could take care about them. And this story asked me to think, and this is what I would like all of us to think about. What does make us humans? Why? Why do we think about ourselves that we are humans? And you know what people in Ukraine, also these guys and girls on the front line, some of them probably will be killed in coming half an hour. What do they think? What do they say about it? It's not about religion. It's not about, big ideas. It's about something that any one of us is going to live after we go from this earth. And probably this is what makes us makes us humans. This is about to make our planet, not even planet, it's too large world and too big word, about our land, about our place where we live, to make it a little bit better than it was when we came here. I can't imagine, I really can't imagine what should happen in the heads of people who came to Ukrainian land to destroy, to kill, to fire forests, to kill cats. I even can't imagine. Because, yes, if somebody gets to your house and is trying to kill you and your family, yes, you have to defend yourself and your family. Yes. But if somebody invades to the country that never could imagine to be dangerous for another country, what should happen in the heads of these people? My dear colleagues, my dear friends, because a lot of you I can call friends without any doubts. The question that I would like us to think about is new understanding of architecture of sovereignty and independence, not only in Europe, of course, but in Europe, first of all, because we are OSCE. And in my opinion, this new architecture of independent, connected, self-protected and commonly protected countries should be based on the idea that we don't only, we shouldn't think only about safe, we should also think about our common defense. Because yes, if we want to save our planet, our nature, our families, and creatures around us, including cats, that I've mentioned. We have to be ready to defend. So let's think commonly. How can we build safely Europe, but Europe that can defend itself? Thank you very much, dear friends and colleagues.
Thank you, Mikita, for this very touching story and for your considerations. Of course, the priority for everybody is to try to stop this this war. But after that, we will really need to think about what can be done to try to avoid the repetition of this kind of issues or events in future. So that's the whole idea about the Helsinki plus 50 process. But as I say, now the priority is really to try to help stop this craziness that is ongoing. Let's continue with the panel. We have now, I'm glad to announce that the presence of Ambassador Tula Iriola. She's the deputy head of the Secretariat and the director of the Conflict Prevention Center in Vienna, in the OSCE. And good to see you, Tula. You could share with us some of your thoughts and some of your concerns about the role of the OSCE in this moment in relation to the conflict, and also share with us what you are doing, what you're trying to do, and where you need support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lamberto, and I do hope that you can hear me, and greetings from Sarajevo, where I actually am at the moment. We have our regional heads of mission meeting starting tomorrow here. But thank you so much for inviting me to this event. I am always glad when I am able to address the Parliamentary Assembly. I believe that it is such an important part of the OSCE and the work that you do. So very, very glad to have that opportunity. And of course, I think it's so important also for us to jointly reflect on what we as an organization can do to address the war in Ukraine and its consequences. I was reminded of you had a session in May, and I was reading some of the main points that were taken up then, and of course, very much of that holds, or actually maybe even all of that still holds true today. Now. I obviously don't need to tell you, and we all know that for Ukraine itself, the impact of the war continues to be devastating. I mean, we all follow the reports of the civilian deaths, displacement, destruction, atrocities, and after really so many months already of violence, we're still struggling to grasp the scale and the far-reaching consequences that this war is having on Ukraine itself, but I think also really more globally, more widely to the OSCE region, and even wider in terms of the implications to our societies, on the environment, on global economies, and everything that comes out of that, on our security architecture also. And of course also to the OSCE as an organization. And I believe and I hope that we can all agree that the work of the OSCE, which is of course to strengthen cooperation in our region and also beyond, and to reduce the likelihood of conflict and to help alleviate its consequences, as well as to create greater security and stability. I mean, I firmly believe myself that it's more urgent, and more important now than ever that we work for this organization to be able to do what we can, along with the other international organizations, of course, also that are working on all these issues. Now, before talking a little bit about our future role, let me just reflect a bit on the past and the present engagement of the OSCE in Ukraine, because I think it's important also really to keep that in mind, because if you think about it, already for more than 25 years, we've partnered with the government and people of Ukraine to strengthen comprehensive security in Ukraine and around Ukraine, and we continue to do so. And over all these years, I think the important thing is we've built trusted relationships with government and civil society in Ukraine. And while much of the focus in the last years, for very good reasons, has been on the special monitoring mission on SMM, I mean, let's recall that since the 1990s already, the project coordinator in Ukraine and its predecessor, field operation, I mean, they were supporting Ukraine across the OSCE's 3 dimensions. And I'm glad to say that for the time being, much of the support continues to be delivered as we speak. And of course, then in 2014, the OSCE was able to play a critical role as it responded to the developing crisis by deploying the SMM and later that summer, the observer mission at the Donetsk and Gukovo border crossing points. And this was really a major endeavor. And the crisis saw our organization acting together and determined to play its part. Now, the OSCE's presence on the ground, monitoring and reporting on the security situation, was an important element of our response to the crisis, with the 2 missions often described as the eyes and the ears of the international community. And it really did provide decision makers, but also the actors on the ground, with what was timely and objective information on the security situation, on the ceasefire, and on other measures, such as, for example, the situation in the disengagement areas. And in some ways, thinking about it now, it's striking to realize that when we're now looking for information of what is happening on the ground, we can rely on very few voices, really. That's mainly on the brave journalists who are making it to the front lines, and the need for independent, impartial, neutral, and fact-based information and reporting was actually never greater than it is now. Now, of course, throughout the years also of the SMM, a lot was also done in support of the conflict-affected civilians, and the SMM, I think, played a major role in facilitating these localized ceasefires. I personally had the chance to see that when I was visiting there only last September, how they helped enabled the necessary repair works to key civilian infrastructure. So there was really a benefit to civilian populations living on both sides of the contact line. And at the same time, throughout all these years, the project coordinator continued to deliver and contributed to safety and stability in Ukraine, and supported Ukraine's reform agenda, strengthening its democratic institutions. And I won't go further into all of that past, but what I want to say is that despite the outbreak of the war on the 24th of February this year, the project coordinator has continued to deliver on their projects, and they have maintained presence in the country. Yes, the international staff was temporarily evacuated, but in early April, the project coordinator returned to Ukraine, first to Uzhhorod and later to Kiev. And they do continue work there. And of course, where possible, also adjusting the work to the current needs and requirements, and providing support to areas of humanitarian demining, addressing environmental damage caused by the armed conflict, supporting chemical and biological safety and security, countering trafficking in human beings, psychological support in crisis situations, legal support to IDPs and vulnerable populations. I mean, you can see that there's a lot that the OSCE can do. And they're also addressing emergency needs in Ukraine and working very much in close cooperation with their longstanding partners, Ukrainian partners, but also with other international stakeholders. So now we have a situation then, of course, where basically, I think that the future needs of Ukraine will be huge. And we're already looking forward to the future and how we can support. Now, there was a recent briefing on the work of the project coordinator in the field of humanitarian mine action. And really that only reinforced the notion that when you think about the scale of the work ahead, I mean, Ukraine now is one of the most densely mine contaminated countries in the world. There will be a lot to do in that sphere for us, for everyone who is involved in mine action. Now, looking at the future, right now, support to Ukraine is provided not only through the project coordinator, but also through the Secretariat and the institutions. And so we've been working to ensure that the support we provide adapts to the changing needs as well as to the changing circumstances. And the Russian Federation has already indicated that it will not join consensus on extending the mandate of the project coordinator in Ukraine. Let's see now, today is Wednesday, so we ought to be hearing about that tomorrow at the Permanent Council in terms of a decision, but the project coordinator in Ukraine's mandate expires on the 30th of June. And if the decision based on tomorrow, what we hear tomorrow at the Permanent Council is indeed that the mission would not be able to continue to work on its mandate, then the mission will indeed have to stop implementing all mandated activities, including all its project work. But coming back to the fact that this ongoing war in Ukraine, it is creating enormous needs in the country, and Ukraine itself, but also very many participating states have indicated their desire to see continued strong OSCE engagement and presence in Ukraine. And this is a high priority for us and for the Secretariat, together with the chair. And so we're discussing possibilities and we're considering options as to what a future OSCE role in Ukraine might look like, what a possible OSCE, let's say, footprint without the footprint of the physical mission on the ground, but what it might look like. And it's still too early to set out in detail what shape this cooperation will take. So I cannot give you any inside dish on that, because we really are looking into all the options. But what I would say is that the OSCE has actually a very good track record of working in post-conflict settings, including in collaboration with other international organizations. And we do have experience in working with extra budgetary programs and frameworks of cooperation. So I would say that we can envisage options for continuing active engagement with Ukraine across the full OSCE agenda and in line with the needs and priorities of Ukraine, even in the future. And the main thing maybe also to say, or a very important thing to say, is that whatever the decision then on how we would do is, it will be fully in accordance with OSCE mandates, and we will be operating in full transparency and with full accountability and in line with OSCE rules and regulations. I mean, there will be a range of challenges. We will need to look to participating states as donors to show continued generosity and flexibility as we adapt to these changed circumstances. But I'm confident that with goodwill and determination, we can ensure that we can continue to be able to respond. In the end, it's about responding to the needs of Ukraine, and of course also responding to the needs and wishes of other participating states for support in meeting their OSCE commitments. Now, let me end by just saying that I already mentioned that the implications are, of course, far wider than Ukraine to the OSCE region and wider. And I mentioned also I'm currently in Sarajevo here. I mean, I'm very much thinking also in this case of the implications to Southeastern Europe. If we think about the socio-economic consequences and implications that can become destabilizing or further destabilizing factors and potential for destabilization in countries that already have other fragilities. And this is, of course, not just about Southeastern Europe. It just happens to be the place where I am right now. But we are very much thinking of the entire OSCE region and also looking beyond that, because even things happening beyond the OSCE region, for example, I would say, if you think about the other side of the Mediterranean, the implications will be something that show up in the OSCE region as well. Thank you so much for allowing me these let's say intervention, and I thank you for indeed being able to do that. So I'll end here.
Thanks to you, dear Tula, for taking time from Sarajevo in joining us, and we really appreciate the effort you have made. Having myself been involved at the time as Secretary General in setting up both SMM and the border monitoring, border observation missions, I felt sorry that we lost the eyes and ears, as you put it, from the ground. And I'm very concerned myself about the future of the office of the project coordinator. We'll see what happens. But I think you made also a very important point that work can continue in other ways. The institutions, first of all, you mentioned. I remember myself as High Commissioner, Ukraine was one of the most active dossiers I was working on. And certainly the issue of minorities in the future of Ukraine will remain important, and the issue of the treatment of minorities might also be an important issue in the discussions on ending the current war. And of course, projects, as you said, can be also managed from outside, and then you can find implementing partners on the ground. So certainly it is good that you're brainstorming on these issues, and I'm sure parliamentarians would be eager to support you in your efforts. But thank you very much for this display of activism and engagement at a difficult moment for Ukraine, but also for the complicated moment for the organization as such. Now we move to the last of the speakers. At the beginning of the process, of the call for action process, we decided that it would be good every now and then to have representatives of the academic community addressing us, also to enlarge a little bit the picture and to listen to ideas and possible options and possible suggestions. We have invited today a senior researcher from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, from the office that they opened a few years ago in Vienna, an office that is cooperating very closely with the OSCE. I myself, when I was in Vienna, I was very often in contact with the representatives of this Stiftung. So we have Dr. Alexandra Dines joining us today. I welcome her, and I would like to give her the floor to share her thoughts with the members of the Parliamentary Assembly. Thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Zannier, dear Lamberto. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for allowing me to share my perspective with you, indeed coming from the outside, the OSCE, from the academic side. As you rightly mentioned, we opened our office in Vienna a few years ago, almost 6 actually, in the wake of Russia's annexation of Crimea, because we realized that European security is unsustainable, and there are serious difficulties that we face in a cooperative approach to security. We have not dreamt in the wildest dream that it could turn so bad. I personally absolutely did not expect that Russia could indeed invade Ukraine and engage in a full-scale war. However, now we're there, and I will try to provide a few constructive ideas on prospects for peace, indeed, based largely on public opinion polls, which is one of the pillars of our work, and which is, I guess, is particularly interesting for members of parliament, because ultimately they rely for their work on their democratic constituencies. Before I share with you a few PowerPoint slides with some recent data on public opinion on the war, let me line out from an outside and expert perspective 2 prospects for peace for Ukraine that I see right now, and we can discuss the potential advantages and drawbacks of these 2 approaches. So the first one is military victory for Ukraine. It envisages a defeat of Russia, reestablishment of territorial integrity of Ukraine. It would weaken Russia so it cannot repeat such aggression in the future. This is the so-called justice camp approach, if I may call it this way, and I will come back to this metaphor in the future. So why is this approach good? Well, it's fair and morally right. It also corresponds with the official course of the Ukrainian government. And this strategy, however, crucially relies on shipment of armaments from the West, as we know, to support Ukraine militarily. And this approach is also premised on the debilitating effect of economic sanctions placed on Russia, and also on the Russian losses on the battlefield, in the hope that they will change Russia's calculus and make it retreat. This approach, however, dismisses somewhat the fear of an escalation, perhaps of a nuclear escalation in the worst case, arguing that Russia so far has backtracked from its maximal goals and avoided direct confrontation with NATO, apart, of course, from its official rhetoric. The cost of such approach would be a very high human toll and further destruction. It's also an unsure prospect. It's not clear how long a military victory by Ukraine will take, especially given the uncertain amount and speed of Western weapon deliveries. And as said, a danger could be a potential escalation up to the unthinkable nuclear escalation. The second approach or second prospect for peace is, well, to stop the war as soon as possible through negotiations. And this is the so-called peace camp. I will also refer to this camp, judging by the public opinion, in a few moments. So why is this approach premised on negotiations good? Well, it would save lives and end the combat perhaps sooner than in other scenarios, but probably at a very high unacceptable cost of a loss of territories. So concessions, territorial concessions. It is not fair because Russia is an aggressor and might be encouraged to repeat such aggressive behavior in the future. So the cost are concessions and indirect legitimation of Russia and its leadership. And it's right now politically impossible to negotiate with Putin, given the war crimes that we have experienced. The danger of this approach is a renewed aggression against Ukraine, Russian aggression against Ukraine, or Russian aggression elsewhere. Neither side seems to be prepared to negotiate right now because both see themselves on the winning side, or both hope that they can gain on the battlefield. We know that back in March, both sides were seriously negotiating. There are indicators, at least from my background talks, also with representatives from the Ukrainian negotiating team, that sides were negotiating in good faith. However, as we know, talks collapsed at the end of March after the world has seen harrowing pictures from Bucha. As we know from history, wars generally finish through negotiations, or usually they do. And the question is when. It's either when one side wins, and I sketched out this scenario, which I personally find not very likely given the limitations and challenges, or wars finish through negotiations when both sides reach a stalemate. And given the war of attrition that we face right now, it appears, unfortunately and sadly, but the most likely option, which means that the war will most likely drag on for still quite some time before the sides decide to sit at the negotiations table. In any case, the kind of good scenario number one, it is premised on the unity within the Western camp that is supporting Ukraine and united against Russia and its aggression. And this unity is all but a given, given the high and not evenly distributed economic pain that the anti-Russian sanctions inflict and all the related rising inflation and rising cost of food and especially energy, etc. And also the unity is fraying given the different assessment of the roots of the conflict. And this we also know from public opinion polls. Sizable shares of the public in some Western countries see NATO, US, or EU as responsible for the conflict, strange as it may seem. So let us maybe now have a look at some data that I have prepared for you to have a better understanding of this fraying unity, as I put it. And let me share with you my PowerPoint in a second. All right. So now I hope that you're able to see my first slide. As said, I will be sharing a few public opinion data with you, and mostly the insights are based on our own public opinion poll called Security Radar that we did just before the war. Well, we didn't know back then that it was before the war, but it's kind of the status quo of autumn 2021. And I will now and then come back to this data kind of as a baseline to see how opinions changed. We did this opinion poll in 14 different OSCE countries, including Russia and Ukraine, but also United States, UK, Norway, Serbia, Germany, France, Poland, etc. I have fresh data or fresher data from Ipsos, which is the same institute that conducted our poll for us from March 2022. And I have the very, very fresh data for Germany, which is a crucial country within the EU, and seeing the changing opinion in Germany is also quite interesting. The data is from June 2022, so just a few days old. And I will also share one picture from one poll by the European Council on Foreign Relations, exemplifying this division in the so-called justice camp and peace camp. And let me start maybe with this to give you a better understanding of how different the perceptions are in some of the crucial Western countries. So the justice camp that I was referring to as the first scenario, maybe a good scenario from the moral point of view, it's the people who endorse the following statement. The most important thing is to punish Russia for its aggression, even if it means that more Ukrainians are killed and displaced. And you can see this on the graph as the violet share. And the peace camp, so the ones who would like to end the war as soon as possible, it's the people who endorsed the following statement. The most important thing is to stop the war as soon as possible, even if it means Ukraine giving control of areas to Russia. Well, as you can see, even though many people are undecided, but the so-called peace camp is quite prevalent in many important European countries, including such countries as Germany and France and Italy. The justice camp is actually in this poll strong only in Poland. I know from my own recent trips discussing the data and discussing the situation in Ukraine that the Baltic states would most likely be found in the justice camp, and perhaps also UK and the United States. But otherwise, so two findings that we see from here: growing division in Europe, or no unity in terms of those two approaches to possible peace in Ukraine. The prevalence of the peace camp, so ending the war as soon as possible, which would entail negotiations, which would entail concessions. Let's look at the differences, or rather in this case, I should say similarities between German, French, and Polish perspectives. These are three important countries in the EU in terms of potential leadership or potential policy change, the so-called Weimar Triangle countries. We see that in all three, there's endorsement of deliveries of weapons to Ukraine. There's, however, rejection of sending own troops, which is not a big surprise, I believe, and also coincides or corresponds with NATO's and President Biden's pledge not to get directly militarily involved in the war. And also sanctions are viewed as effective in all three countries. This poll involved 27 states from across the globe, and one can say that in these three aspects that I'm showing to you now, there's wide agreement. So it's not only Poland, France, and Germany who see it this way. There's large agreement on sanctions, on weapon deliveries, and lack of willingness to send own troops to Ukraine. Turkey and Hungary, which were also part of this poll, stand out, and this again connects to what I've been mentioning throughout my presentation, the potentially fraying unity within the Western camp. Turkey, so Turkish respondents, I should say, they are, unlike many other Western countries, against a whole lot of measures now taken related to the war. They're against additional sanctions. Majorities are against. Majorities are against of persecution of Russian oligarchs, against energy import bans, weapon supplies, and sending on troops. They're very much in favor of keeping diplomatic relations with Russia and are really loath to get involved militarily in the war a very, very high proportion in Turkey. And in Hungary, it looks similar. We know that Hungary has been sabotaging, one should say, some of the EU policies targeted at supporting Ukraine and punishing Russia. And it's a very high share of people in Hungary, worryingly high, who actually do not care about what's going on in Ukraine, which is hard to imagine, but that's at least what the poll shows. Now let's have a look at Germany, because this is A, the country where my foundation comes from, and B, a very crucial one in terms of a, well, indeed 180 degrees or U-turn shift in foreign policy, as you know. Germany, having been an aggressor and the one who started the Second World War a few decades ago, is now abandoning its pacifist foreign policy and abandoning the policy of not sending weapons to conflict zones. You know all that. It's this Zeitenwende that Chancellor Scholz proclaimed on the 27th of February. However, the most recent opinion polls, and here I refer to this one, which is just several days old, they show that Germans are still, or perhaps even more reluctant to use military means in conflicts. And even though the publics support the Zeitenwende and support military support for Ukraine, but as you see, the amount of or share of people even decreased compared to our security radar poll from the autumn, as far as the military interventions in conflicts is concerned. And there's a big difference between Germany, well, not so big, but there's a considerable difference in perceptions between Germany and France, which is also interesting given the different history and much stronger French willingness, perhaps, or less reservations by French public to use military means. Another important aspect where German opinion matters, and this aspect is Ukrainian potential EU membership. Basically, there has been a development just this week that the EU decided to grant Ukraine a candidacy status. It's interesting to see how the public opinion in Germany shifted from, as you see on the left-hand side, basically rejecting it, where just a quarter of the population thought it was a right decision. And now still less than half, but many, many more people, 44%, thinking Ukraine should be granted status. So there is a growing understanding in Germany, but as I know from other polls in other European countries, that Ukraine should be given a European perspective, given this terrible war. One of the final aspects I would like to draw your attention to, which is, I think, very important in the context of the OSCE, it's pragmatic foreign policy or pragmatic approaches. We formulated the question in the following way: my country should cooperate with every country, even those that do not share our values, if it promotes peace and security in the world. So cooperation with not like-minded states, and I should say that this is probably what the OSCE stands for, even though on paper everybody subscribes to the same values, but especially now it's more than obvious that values differ. And in fact, the OSCE unites democratic and authoritarian countries alike. Again, on the example of Germany, because that's the only country for whom I have the most fresh data, can show you the evolution. We see that this pragmatic approach to foreign policy increased. It was like a majority before the war, over 50% endorsing it, but even much more now, 66%. We can see here across the board that there's a big support of pragmatic foreign policy, but I remind you that the data for all other countries is from autumn 2021, and now it's hard to say whether the desire for pragmatism increased given the terrible war and wish to end it as soon as possible, or maybe vice versa, given the wish to, of this justice camp, to punish Russia, to debilitate it as much as possible. Maybe there's stronger desire not to cooperate with countries who do not share the values. I think this development will be very, very crucial for future work and cooperation in the OSCE, and we will certainly do a follow-up poll then next year to see how it developed. Also, one note on Germany, it's interesting that the endorsement of interest-driven foreign policy is stronger than value-driven foreign policy. So we asked whether the country should pursue its interests without restriction or enforce values, even if it poses disadvantages. And you can see on the German example that both approaches garner public support by the majority of the population, but the interest-driven foreign policy has a much stronger support. And this will be maybe also a factor in terms of future decision-making. Food for thought, which I hope will generate some discussion among us. Well, the fraying unity within the EU-NATO camp. As I mentioned, this has been the golden thread of my presentation. I think this will be a very crucial aspect for sustaining military, but also moral support for Ukraine. And so we really don't know how it develops given those divisions between the so-called justice camp and the peace camp. This new dichotomy between autocracy and democracy that has been proclaimed by Biden, but increasingly shapes the discourse towards Russia, but also towards other countries such as China and to some within the OSCE family. I think that this is a dangerous development, or at least is not helpful for European security architecture. It runs the risk of creating new dividing lines and perhaps driving some countries closer, perhaps to China, authoritarian Russia. Well, Russia's place in the world is a question that is very difficult not only to answer, but even to pose given the current circumstances. And it's certainly something that we need to think about only in the future, because right now we need to stop this aggression and stop the war and focus on rebuilding Ukraine. But in the context of the OSCE, and Russia is a member, I guess there will be, already now, it will be necessary to start the process of thinking how to engage with Russia in the future, especially since we are relying on international cooperation even with countries that do not share our values for tackling such big challenges that do not go away despite the war, such as climate change, such as migration, human trafficking, etc. All the topics that the OSCE also focuses on. And finally, what's the future role of the United States? We have seen in the reaction to the war in Ukraine that the United States, of course, has played a very important role in establishing unity in the Western camp. And it's, of course, by far the largest supplier of weapons and economic aid to Ukraine. And just one final glimpse, our poll from autumn, the security radar showed that the US, in fact, or at least the US respondents, I should always say, they exhibit an isolationist tendency in its foreign policy. You can see that on the left-hand side, when we ask which region people think the US should focus their foreign policy engagement, a quarter of the population says, actually none of the regions. Our country should limit its foreign policy involvement. And another quarter says, we don't know. And this is quite unsettling and may mean perhaps that in the future, the US will play a smaller role in European affairs. And also when asked about active foreign policy, the US is bottom of the list among our 14 countries. Very, very final glimmer of hope. Again, data from autumn 21, but I hope that the picture did not change even despite Russia's war in Ukraine. The overwhelming majorities in our polled countries that support peace, that think peace should be a priority in their country, and that the country they live in should be committed to relieving tensions and diplomatic means and peaceful mitigation of conflicts. I think this is a very important message and perhaps could give the OSCE hope and secure its, I hope, leading role in resolving the war. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Alexandra, for your very stimulating and also very candid analysis, and I'm sure parliamentarians will have lots of points and questions to make in relation to that. But before opening the debate, I see that President Sederfeld has joined us, so I would like to ask her whether she wants to say a few words before the open debate. Margareta.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sanier. And also thank you, dear speakers. I have listened a bit about your speech and intervention and found them very interesting. And most of all, dear colleagues, it's a pleasure to join today's meeting. I'm sorry for being late, but it's the last day for the whole mandate period in the Swedish Parliament, and it have been votes, and it have also been speeches by our speaker, so I couldn't join until now. First of all, thank you very much, Ambassador Sanier, and your team for work arranging today's meeting on and addressing the conflict in Ukraine and its consequences. As was said earlier here by our speaker, parliamentarians is very important to work both for peace and an end of the war, but also for the time that will come after the war. We are the one who makes the laws. We are the one who have the possibility also to decide about support for Ukraine. And I think we should use this power because all of us see how people in Ukraine are affected, but also how the economy all over the world is affected. And the food resources. And I am very pleased that we today in my parliament took an decision on an adjustment on the budget because we have decided to send more support to Ukraine. And I think that's important. But what I also would like to say, our discussions as parliamentarian here, to get information directly from those people who have knowledge to share with us, but also to share our views, what have been done in other countries, what struggle do you see, what problems, any ideas for how we could work further to support peace and stability in Ukraine. I think this is extremely important in today's situation. The last time we met, we had the opportunity to hear and discuss about various initiatives that can be taken in our different countries, and also implementation of the sanctions, as well as providing aid directly to Ukraine. And we discussed the availability to different channels for diplomacy to stop the war. And I would like to inform you, dear colleagues, about steps I have taken after our last meeting. I have appointed Vice President Reinhold Lopatka, a special representative for parliamentary dialogue on Ukraine, and so we can do whatever we can as parliamentarians to contribute to a dialogue on the parliamentarian level. I see it is extremely important. And also his mandate is to coordinate closely with the OSCE chairpersonship and the executive structures, as well as with other international actors, to promote the current coherent actions and to facilitate the dialogue between Ukraine and Russia. I have also appointed Mr. John Whittingdale, the head of the United Kingdom's delegation to OSCE, a special special rapporteur on the war crimes in Ukraine. And he will be in charge of informing our assembly of steps taken by local and international authorities to investigate and document and prosecute alleged war crime committed in Ukraine. I see this as also a very important issue. As elected parliamentarians, we have to stand on the people's side and do what we can to promote both peace, stability, but also to act against crime in the name of war. And I believe, as I said, that we can do a lot to promote peace, that the OSCE PA is a unique forum with the 57 delegations from 57 states to expose the uncomfortable truths and support of international accountability mechanism. And I hope that our discussion today with our panelists can help us to further refine what role OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and the OSCE as a whole can play in addressing the war and its consequences. And also look forward, there will be a day after the war, and what can we do to support stability and long-standing peace. I look forward to today's presentation and to the debate. Thank you very much, and thank you once again, Ambassador Sanier and your team for the work you are doing. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Madam President. Now we open the debate, but before giving the floor to the first of the speaker, I see that Nikita Potorayev would like to add a few comments to his previous presentation. So, Nikita, why don't we do this right away? You have the floor.
Thank you, Lambert. Thank you very much. Colleagues, I'd like to turn your attention to the fact that words mean a lot. And please, on behalf of all Ukrainians, on behalf of at least 200 young Ukrainian men and women that will be killed by the end of this day, on behalf of at least 5 civilians that will be killed by the end of this day, I ask you not to use such words as conflict in Ukraine, not to use such words as conflict around Ukraine. No, I ask you to use words from Nuremberg Tribunal. It's large-scale war of aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine. It's not a conflict. It's not something. It's war of aggression with crimes of aggression in Ukraine. So please, let's all of us use correct words. If somebody, well, I'm very thankful for a very interesting survey, sociological survey that was presented here. And what, again, as also PhD in political sciences, what I understand from this survey is that a lot of people, millions of people in Europe, think that is something very far from them. No, it's only 5 hours by car from Kiev, where I am now, to the front line. It's 5 hours from Kiev, so it's 10 hours from Warsaw. It's 12 hours from Bucharest. It's like 10 hours from Krakow. And it's only, if I remember perfectly well, like 14 hours from Berlin. It's not far. This war is in Europe, not somewhere far from Europe. This war of aggression is inside Europe. And the second thing that I would like to turn your attention on, there was a very interesting figure of Ukrainian attitude. Yes, we Ukrainians, we also, and we always were ready for peace. And we always proposed peace to Russians. Of course, we take care about democracy. We fight and die for democracy in our country, for freedom and democracy, right now, this moment, not tomorrow, not day after, this moment. A lot of our people are dying for democracy and freedom right now. But okay, if Russians want to be slaves, we're not going to invade to Russia. Delivering freedom to Russian Federation. If they want to live as slaves, okay. But it's not we who came to Russia. Russians came here to Ukraine because we just wanted to live in freedom. This is all very simple wish. This is all that we wanted, you know? And that's why they came. And finishing, as you've heard, and I'm sure that you all heard, Putin proclaims his goals absolutely clearly. He is restoring Russian empire. What does it mean? It means that a lot of OSCE countries are not insecure. It means that Russians, after Ukraine, will come to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, to Moldova, to Baltic states. Again, you're lucky, dear friends and colleagues, you are lucky that you don't understand Russian language as we understand, as we all understand here. We read it every day. Their goals are clear. They are restoring Russian empire. Again, Putin said that they are restoring Russian empire. What does it mean? It means that they will come for their territories. They declared that they are going for their so-called territory, their so-called territories. It's clear. The future is clear. They will come to Middle Asia. They will come to Baltic states. They will come to Moldova. They will come to Georgia. They will come to Armenia and Azerbaijan. This is what they have declared. It's not my imagination. It's Putin's words. And let me turn again to the thesis that I stressed at the very beginning. Any democracy is worth anything only in case if it can protect itself. It's not a case of Ukraine. It's a case of all free and democratic states in Europe, and not only in Europe. We have to find common decision. How are we going to protect ourselves? Not to protect only us. We are fighting. Again, this is what I told you about our losses. By the end of this day, we are not going to surrender. But please think about you. Think about your countries. Think about your rights, human rights. Think about your democracies. It's a matter, our organization is an organization for security and cooperation. And yes, we have to think about cooperation. But first of all, today, unfortunately, none of us wanted this. But let's think about security. What means? Let's think about how OSCE countries can protect themselves from tyranny, from war of aggression, which will come to every OSCE country if we let them do it. Thank you, colleagues. Sorry for my emotional speech.
Thank you, Mikita. Very clear. Let's hear the reactions now. The first speaker I have on the list is Mr. Jorge Seguro Sanchez from Portugal. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, dear President Margareta, Mr. Ambassador Danier, Mr. Secretary of General, and dear Nikita, all our solidarity to Ukraine, and we are very concerned about your words. And I will talk about other things, because about the situation in Ukraine, I think Nikita is the better person to talk in this meeting. The war in Ukraine brought to Europe space and unthinkable reality, and as you already mentioned today, with serious global and regional impacts. The crisis that we are seeing in Ukraine must push us to think different and to act better. Energy is one of the most affected sectors. The pressure on energy prices caused by fear to scarcity showed us how vulnerable we are and how important it is to have a vision for this sector. Ensuring security of supply or increasing investments in renewable energy are even more relevant and unquestionable in the context of our nation's defense. The war revealed that the importance of ensuring backup and the resilience of our system in order to reduce security weakness. We think security of supply is relevant to understand whether we can do through reinforcement of interconnections or investments on decentralization, empowering the citizens. Only a strong vision can allow us to increase a spirit of cooperation and strength foundations for solidarity among us. I'd like to share with everyone our view that the war in Ukraine makes that already was urgent in the terms of energy policy in our planet in this moment is very urgent. Issues such as security of supply and investment in renewable energy have become unavoidable in discussion on security and defense. Because it does not have fossil energies, Portugal, one of the countries that advanced more in renewable energies, is one of the actors in the changes in energy policy in the European Union. And is available to share this good example for all of you. Thank you and see you soon in Birmingham. Thank you very much. In Birmingham. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Next is Pavlo Frollo from Ukraine. Pavlo, you have the floor.
Dear Madam President, dear Ambassador Zanier, dear colleagues, while you will be listening to my short speech, at this time, the Russian rockets, planes, tanks, and artillery will kill or injure at least 3-4 Ukrainians. During our entire conversation today, my country may lose dozens of soldiers and civilians. There is no time to be hesitant. Colleagues, we are talking about extremely terrible things, about the inhuman suffering of millions of Ukrainians, which human civilization has not seen for almost 80 years after the end of World War II. This horrible war has become a tragedy for almost every family in Ukraine. The Russian troops continue destroying Ukraine with indiscriminate missile strikes and heavy artillery. More than 18,000 civilian infrastructure facilities were destroyed and damaged, including roads and bridges, educational and medical institutions, water and electricity networks, cultural and religious sites. These numbers do not include the occupied territories. Vast areas are covered with mines. Russia continues to seize grain and other agricultural products from the occupied territories and sell it. The worst humanitarian situation remains in the regions along the front line and in those occupied by Russia. The city of Mariupol was almost entirely destroyed by Russian attacks, with dozens of thousands of casualties and forceful deportations by the Russian occupiers, looting, tortures, murders, and abduction are widespread in the occupied areas. More than 12 million Ukrainian citizens fled their homes. The world is immersed in the world food, global energy, infrastructure, European migration crises. How did this become possible? We have a completely ineffective international system. Despite the robust architecture of international organization, courts and mandates, they cannot do enough, unfortunately. It is time we put the words into action. The OSCE and its members have a chance to make a significant contribution to changing the world order and building fair relations between countries. I have emphasized before that we have to vote to exclude a terrorist country from our organization, or at least suspend the powers of the Russian delegation in the assembly. Next, let's call on other international organizations to exclude Russia from their members. The UN must exclude Russia from the permanent members of the UN Security Council. Enable a newborn fascist and Nazi country cannot be entitled to veto world security. We have to amplify the cost of the war for Russia. Any lifting of sanctions has to be agreed with Ukraine. There has to be found a legal way to confiscate Russia's frozen foreign exchange reserves and assets abroad to be further used for compensation to Ukraine and Ukrainian citizens. Russia must be further economically and politically isolated from the world, losing its capacities to influence decision-making in other countries and international bodies. I mean withdrawal of private business, banning Russian propaganda channels, ending Russia's influence in politics, business, sports, culture, research and other spheres, introducing visa regime, expelling from international financial institutions, banning Russia's membership in international organization, and dismissal Russian citizens from their secretariats. Concluding my speech, I thank you for supporting Ukraine and for organizing this third discussion of Russia's terrible war against Ukraine and possible future steps by the international community, including OSCE, to reduce their suffering of Ukrainians, ensure Russians' defeat, and bring it to peace. This is the only way to restore respect for international law, democratic values, a simple human being's right not to be killed, and the right of nations to freely choose their future and freedom, to ensure Ukraine's victory on the battlefield. As Russia continues to focus on war, not diplomacy, ignoring all decisions and resolutions of the OSCE and other international organizations, we must be prepared for a long-term struggle. We must not allow Kremlin to use its propaganda and growing war fatigue to weaken the support for Ukraine. The Ukrainians will never surrender. We will definitely win. The question is the price of this victory. The sooner we get significant volumes of modern, high precision and effective weapons, the more lives of Ukrainian military and civilians we will save. Every day we suffer hundreds of casualties, mostly die to a lack of heavy weapons. Russia's military machine can be stopped by well-armed, well-equipped Ukrainian army, and save the future, not only Ukraine, but the whole Europe. Thank you very much, and see you on Birmingham.
Thank you, Pablo. I have now Mr. Kari Eriksen from Norway. Kari, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sanje and Mr. President Sederfeld and Roberto, the General Secretary, and the staff for having this opportunity to talk about this important issue. And I would also like to thank all the panelists for their introductions. And with a special thanks to Mr. Nikita and Frolov for their direct speech from the ground of Ukraine. And Mr. Nikita, you asked in your start of your introduction, you invited us really to reflect on what is human and what is humanitarian behavior. And it's, of course, a very difficult question, and it's a philosophical one which can take a long time to consider. But I think some of the human dimensions is reflected in OSCE's values and in our commitments in the OSCE. That was created after a similar Cold War. We have not Cold War now. No, we have a hot war and aggressive war. But then there was an agreement on what was human values and human dimensions, and they are now our guidelines in the OSCE. And I would also like to follow up what Margareta said, because she said there will be a day after the war. And I don't think any of us know how that day will be. But we know one thing, and that is most of us will continue to be parliamentarians, and we have a commitment to build the new Europe after this war. We are 57 countries that have this obligation. And I think we as our primary task now must first of all be to support Ukraine in their military actions as well as we can, humanitarian actions, and we have to ensure that the military international conventions about protecting civilians and prisoners of war must be upheld by the Russians in the war. And I think also we have to make an effort in our own countries and parliaments to ensure that still international organizations needs financing, no more than ever. And especially for our group, we have to encourage our countries to finance OSCE. If we are going to succeed in rebuilding anything after this war, and this, as Mrs. Rognoni showed us, there are some different opinions on how we should go on in these issues. But if we should have any chance to really do some change, we need finances, and we need also to have to finance all the other institutions that are quite crucial to make sure that we have the right facts, that we have journalists and ground personnel on the ground to can be witness what has been going on, that we have international judges and court system that can judge and give their opinion on what has really been going on. And we also have to ensure that that we collaborate with the international organizations in a way that we don't do double up of actions. And most of all, I think it demands of us just to be like Nikita said, to bring out the humanity in ourselves and in the organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Kari. Next is Right Honourable John Whittingdale from the UK. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador Zanier. Can I start by saying we are very much looking forward to welcoming delegations from all of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly to Birmingham in just 10 days' time. However, I should make clear that there will not be representation there from Russia or Belarus due to the policy of my government that we will not issue sanctions whilst the invasion of Ukraine by Russia with the support of Belarus continues. Undoubtedly, our discussions in Birmingham are going to be dominated by the continuing war taking place in Ukraine and the devastating damage that is doing and the horrendous loss of life. I want to pay tribute to the incredible courage being shown by Ukrainians and the very moving speech which we heard from Nikita. My government will continue to give every support to Ukraine in terms of weapons, in terms of the imposition of sanctions on Russia, and in terms of humanitarian aid. And I'm also pleased that already recognition has been given during the course of our discussion this afternoon of the bravery being shown by journalists in bringing truth or exposing the truth of what is going on in Ukraine. And I'm pleased that the motion I tabled on the safety of journalists will be debated at our assembly. But as Nikita said, this conflict is about an invasion of Ukraine, but it also has huge implications for other countries in Europe and indeed beyond. We are seeing threats being made now to Lithuania in the last 24 hours. And that is obviously a matter of profound concern, which I'm sure we will also want to touch on when we debate these matters in the next couple of weeks. And we are seeing a global crisis emerging as a result of the prevention of the export of grain from Black Sea ports like Odessa, which a large part of Africa and the Middle East depend upon for their food supplies. And so this is a war which is now having a global impact. It needs to be brought to an end, and it will indeed one day stop. But I was concerned to hear the presentation by Dr. Deans about the attitude across Europe towards the war. We need to be robust. We need to be absolutely clear that aggression cannot be allowed to pay. Russia cannot gain from having this unprovoked, unjustified invasion. And that means that we should be utterly robust in saying that if it comes to a halt, it should be to restore the boundaries of the sovereign territory of Ukraine to their pre-2014 borders. There will be other matters that we will need to concentrate on. I'm extremely grateful to Madam President, who has asked me to become the Special Rapporteur on the issue of war crimes. We are very much aware of the horrendous scenes we've seen of the bodies being dug up in Bucha, of the deliberate bombing of civilians in Mariupol and other cities of Ukraine. But there are also very disturbing reports about mass deportations into camps across Russia, including of children. We've seen the killing of journalists, as I've mentioned. We're seeing the destruction of cultural heritage across Ukraine. All of these constitute potential war crimes. And whilst the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly is not a body that can bring prosecutions, we need to press to make sure that Russia is held account for its actions when this war eventually comes to an end. And therefore, I will be very honoured to take on the job of reporting to the Assembly on the progress being made to accumulate the evidence which will be needed to hold not just the leaders of Russia to account, but all those who are committing crimes at the present time as we speak. And then we will need to focus on the task of rebuilding Ukraine. And we've already heard that that is going to be an immense undertaking. The scale of destruction is horrendous. We will need to talk about the aid which is going to be required and possibly the reparations which we will demand from Russia for the damage that they have caused. So I pray this war does not go on for too much longer, although I have to say that I'm not optimistic at the moment. And I'm absolutely determined that so-called war fatigue should not mean that we make concessions and allow Russia to claim any kind of victory for its actions. But when it does come to an end, then there is still a huge amount to do, as we've already heard. And I hope that we will have an opportunity to debate this and all the associated matters in Birmingham. And I look forward to welcoming you there very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Ms. Alexandra Tavares de Moura, Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. President Margareta Cederfeld, dear colleagues, I begin by welcoming the Assembly President's decision of appointing a special rapport on war crimes in Ukraine, Mr. John Whitingale. And I want to support too, at this moment, the recent decision of the Ukraine Parliament that ratifies Istanbul Convention. I hope that the mandate to advance investigations related to the total amount of body count in this war, which will be held by Osce and other international organizations. Just a minute, please. Okay. Paired with the investigation about sexual violence in conflict will be done with total transparency. I hope the necessary accountability mechanisms for this kind of crime will be found. On the 22nd of April, President Zelensky, in the welcoming session in the Portuguese Parliament, our Parliament, told us at the very beginning that they found at that time in a city near them, Borodianka, 2 massive common ditches with children that were raped. On Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Secretary General of ONU recalled that thousands of women and girls have had to leave their homes since the conflict began. Guterres also spoke about the growing allegations of sexual violence against them in their country. And he said that the number may be higher, as it is likely that many remain silent or do not register the crime. During this time of war, many cases of sexual violence with children, women, and men, and with the eldest are being reported. Many stories of rape, many situations of physical and mental abuse. This kind of violence, as we know, it's going to mark and change the course of their lives. Anyone that has had their life touched in a manner as horrible as this cannot be expected to have the will and the strength to fight against this war without reliving at all time their story. If you can't stop the war, because the only one who can doesn't want to, we must assemble multidisciplinary teams that will not only support anyone that has had their integrity compromised and violated, but also help all the others to come forward with the underreported cases. Mrs. President, if Osce wants to have a role in this process, it must be one that guarantees we are aware and on top of every kind of sexual violence committed so that we can intervene and assist in a way that gives these civilians ability and capacity to live as well as it is possible and allow them to build a better future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's continue with Mr. Peter Julian from Denmark.
Thank you.
Meeting is being recorded.
Can you hear me? My connection is not so good, so I will not turn on my camera. I think, we all have to pay very much respect for the Ukrainian people and Ukrainian army, because actually they are fighting our war. And the only way we can help them is by sending weapons and aid in every means that they demand. Of course, we will be challenged in the rest of Europe because this will affect all of us. But the only solution is to stand behind Ukraine, because there's only two ways in this. One way, we are backing Ukraine, and the other way, if we are continuing not to support very tough sanctions against Russia, we are actually helping Ukraine's enemy. We are a member of an international organization, and of course it is a challenge when two countries within the organization is at war. But Russia is the aggressor here. They are raping, they are stealing, they are killing, they are doing all the things that we saw back in Europe in the 40s. They learned very much and very well from the Nazis. We have to stand together, and we have to back the sanctions and back the Ukrainian army in every way we can. We owe that to our grandchildren, because if Ukraine doesn't succeed here, this problem will never go away. And then we have to think a little bit further, because the countries who are not taking sides with Ukraine, I'm thinking of China, India, and a couple of countries in Africa, we have to also promote sanctions very soon in the future against them, because nobody should be able to live on as they used to. We have to be tough when people and countries are not living up to international law. It should never pay off to start a war. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Noted. Let's move to the next speaker, Mr. Selami Altinok from Turkey.
Participants, this is the Turkish English interpreter speaking. There will be voiceover interpretation. Please pin Selami Altinok to see him. Distinguished President, distinguished Chairperson, distinguished colleagues and counterparts, dear friends, dear participants. I would like to greet you all with respect, and I listened to Mr. Nikita's speech wholeheartedly. I understand the troubles that they are going through, including the members of the parliament and including children, women, all the citizens, everyone there on that territory is struggling. Since day one, as Republic of Turkey, we have clearly demonstrated our position against the war and our position supporting Ukraine. In addition to that, we are trying to use diplomatic channels for this sake, together with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, got together with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Turkey during the ADF Antalya Diplomacy Forum in Antalya, and then certain representatives of the foreign affairs of the said countries also came together in Istanbul, where Turkey played the facilitator role. And we are underlining the importance of keeping the dialogue channels and using the dialogue channels for the rapid solution of the war, for solving this problem. From a geographical point of view, Turkey is located near both to Ukraine and Russia. We have close relations with both of them for years, since the past. When the Russian invasion started back in 2014, and not just in Ukraine, but the annexation of Crimea and the occupation of part of Donbass back in the time, was the time when we were, as Turkey, was still trying to utter and raise our voice and draw the attention of the world to this part of the world. but our efforts were inconclusive. Our voice was not heard. And if back in that time our warnings were taken seriously by certain parties, maybe we had better chance to intervene and stop this invasion, stop this occupation before it escalated up to this point. But in this process that we are having today, the facilitator role of Turkey, let me tell you, all the participants will continue, because on one hand we are supporting the territorial integrity of Ukraine, on the other hand we are adopting the policy of the Russian forces retreating and getting outside of the territories of Ukraine. One way or another, this war will end, but at that point, we will have to have a basis of dialogue to dress the wounds. This is exactly why we have to keep the dialogue channels open, and we have to altogether prepare ourselves for the post-war era as well. I believe today's speeches delivered by all the panelists, all the participants, will be quite beneficial, quite fruitful for all of us. Turkey's position, that is crystal clear, is very well known by our allies under NATO and our counterparts here under OSCE EPA as well. But if we close and shut down the dialogue channels altogether, Mr. Ambassador would reflect his years-long experience in this regard. Everyone knew that getting conclusive results and concrete outcomes would be not that possible, according to my opinion. And at this point, I once again would like to underline the great efforts exerted by the President of the OSCE EPA, Madam Margareta, and thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your efforts as well. I rest assured. I am resting assured. I believe that it will not take that long. As long as we are together, as long as we are united, and then we will stop the war, and the women and the girls and people won't die. We are here. We are involved as Republic of Turkey. We are the facilitators. We are trying to raise the voice for this stance, for this position as much as we can at every platform. But let's stand united. Let's keep the dialogue channels open. Let's just continue working relentlessly. And thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, all the participants. I'm looking forward to see you in person in Birmingham. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Mr. Altinok. Next speaker is Mrs. Marta Freitas from Portugal.
Thank you, Ambassador Lamberto Zanier, President Margaret Sederfeld, dear colleagues. From the last meeting, the role of the OSCE in addressing the war in the Ukraine and its consequences resulted in some general recommendations for the participating states. Namely, participating states were urged to increase support and assistance in addressing traffic, internal displacement, and ensuring adequate protection for refugees. It is on this recommendation that I would like to focus my speech today, given that earlier this week was the World Refugee Day. I would like to share the situation in Portugal regarding migration and essentially make an appeal. Since 2019, Portugal has been working to implement the National Plan for the Implementation of the Global Compact for Migration. This is an interministerial document that allowed to strengthen national policies for the integration of migrants, as well as to promote the connection of migrants to their countries of origin and return projects. In the context of the emergency situation in Ukraine, given the urgency of welcoming Ukrainian citizens that are fleeing from armed conflict in Ukraine, the Portuguese government took the initiative to grant temporary protection to displaced people, even before the approval by the Council of the European Union of implementing decision. Having, after this decision, proceed to extend the scope of temporary protection. To coordinate the process, the Ukraine Task Force was set up, which includes the involvement of various government areas and respective services that have responsibilities of reception and integration, but also with civil society entities. Portugal aims to guarantee and monitor the different dimensions of this reception process, namely accommodation, learning the Portuguese language, education, healthcare, professional training and employment, regularization of the migratory situation, pointing out situations that may constitute human trafficking, among other dimensions. It seems to me that this open door policy that welcomes all the displaced people from Ukraine, which according to the data from June 20, Portugal has already surpassed the 43,000 people displaced from Ukraine who made the request for temporary protection. This policy should remain in the days to come. It is important to continue the path of solidarity with those who have been forced to leave their homes, their country, and seek safety for themselves and their families. This support will have to be guaranteed by the various countries that receive these asylum applications. I therefore appeal and stress the importance of this solidarity at the time where war in Europe continues with no end and limits on sight, and where we see the impact of the war on the cost of living and on energy prices. This is more present nowadays in the various participating states. Therefore, I keep my appeal for solidarity and the support of these displaced to all the participating states, assuring living and working conditions for these Ukrainian citizens, and the integration in the school environment for children and young people must be strengthened and makes even more sense now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now the last speaker, Mr. Steven.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, my dear colleagues. I'm an alternate member of the Belgian parliamentary delegation from the Party of Labour, and I'm pleased to be able to participate again in this meeting of the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE. And I think we'll have to emphasize that this organization was founded on the basis of the Helsinki Final Act, a crucial agreement which for decades has prevented destructive war on our continent, and a war which would probably have turned nuclear between the two blocs that oppose each other during the Cold War. So this was achieved through an inclusive security architecture that honored the philosophy that the security of one country or one bloc is not only possible by guaranteeing the security of all countries or both blocs. So disarmament treaties and arms control treaties, as well as a mutual cooperation, followed to ensure such security. And we cannot emphasize enough that today we are experiencing another crucial and chaotic moment of transition, because we are experiencing, I think, also the end of the unipolar period that followed the Cold War, and are moving towards a new, as yet only vaguely defined multipolar world. So the absolute priority now is, and not only for Europe, but for the whole world, must be to revive the spirit of Helsinki, to restore the inclusive security architecture that we gradually abandoned after the end of the Cold War. Also wrongly seen, I think, by some as the end of history. And the last thing we need is for this transition to go to a new bloc mentality opposing two or more camps. So the existential problems facing humankind and also our planet, such as climate degradation, the pandemic, hunger, inequality, and poverty, cannot possibly be tackled in such a situation. So the war is also currently destroying Ukraine, the scandalous war, and it's also disrupting the global economy, and it should therefore be ended as soon as possible, also through negotiations. So I consider myself to be within the peace camp, and either in this body or in the United Nations Forum. And when this is accomplished, we must immediately convene this new conference for peace, security and cooperation in Europe, that brings all parties around the table to ensure that de-escalation be so desperately needed, and also a diplomatic solution to this and other potential conflicts based on the principles of the United Nations Charter and the 1975 Helsinki Final Act. Also the 1990s Paris Charter and the new principles that this conference should lay down. And I think this must result in a new common security architecture for Europe. Stability and peace in Europe and beyond require an approach other than military bidding, an arms race, and economic sanctions. What we need is an approach to conflict resolution, arms control, and disarmament measures, and the spirit of cooperation rather than hostility. European and global security can never be guaranteed by investing more billions in armaments. So the OSCE must play, according to me, as to play a leading role and bring all the parties concerned to the table. And I'm therefore proud to announce that together with a number of other delegation members from different countries, we'll be tabling a number of amendments to the Birmingham resolution to work in this direction. So I thank you for your attention, and I hope that many of you also will support these amendments. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Mr. Voist. Well, this concludes the list of speakers. So unless I see any request from the panelists to make any comments on issues that have been raised, I do not really see any reaction. Then I would pass the floor to President Söderfeldt for some concluding remarks.
Thank you, Ambassador Sanier. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for all your insightful comments, remarks, and thoughts for our way forward inside OSCE PA, and also in relations with other parliamentarians and international organizations. And I would particularly like to express my gratitude for Nikita Potorayev's intervention and his colleague. I think it's very valuable for all of us to listen to your remarks, to your experience and thoughts, because it's you who lives in the war and are acting for peace in your country. OSCE PA has, since the illegal annexation of Crimea 2014, stand very clearly on the side of Ukraine. And I'm grateful that we continue to do so. When the war started, the 24th of February, almost 4 months ago, the Assembly held its winter meeting, and it was clear with all the statements that the delegates supported peace, stand on the side of Ukraine against Russia's war. And I am pleased that we do so today. I'm also pleased that several colleagues expressed the support for the Helsinki Final Act, for the Paris Charter, for the European Security Order, and what it means, and all the dimensions, the 3 dimensions included. And also for the expression, the importance to also be very clear that sexual violence is something we need to fight against and be very clear on. And I would like to add human trafficking, because that's what we have seen is a huge risk for the women and children who are on the move from the war in their country, in Ukraine. I would also like to comment what have been raised by several of us, of you. It's the importance to stand united. And I'm pleased to see that we do so in OSCE PA. And we have to continue to do it, because that's the only way to defeat the war, to stand for peace, stability. And I will not speak any longer here. I would just like to say also thank you, as this is our last meeting before our annual session in Birmingham. I would like to express my thank from all of us to Secretary General Roberto Montella and his team for all your efforts, what you are doing to support the work of the parliamentarians of us. Thank you so much for this. It's very appreciated and important. And I look forward to meet all of you in Birmingham. I'm sure we will have a very good program. And thank you already to the UK delegation for your hospitality and all the arrangement. I am sure it will be several important debates where everybody's contribution to the debates, to the decision making is of high importance, particularly during this very difficult circumstances we have in the world today. Thank you very much once again, Ambassador Sanier and your team for today's meeting. And thank you to the speakers. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Madam President, and thanks to everybody else for attending and contributing to the debate. Have a nice evening.